Yes, I have that now. Thank you.
Yeah, we can see it. That's really good.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's pretty early morning at Toronto now. It's about 6 a.m. So good morning to those of you who are in the morning still. First, I'd like to apologize for my nasal voice. It's my COVID voice from last week. I haven't fully recovered yet. So yeah, sorry for that. So thank you very much for this gracious invitation, for giving me the opportunity to address one of the issues that have been the subject of my research for a long time. Creating a reliable IoT environment, looking at it from a security perspective. So this is the outline of the presentation today, a little bit about myself, and then what is IoT and why does it matter, which is, I think we all agree that it matters, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. How big is the IoT market? And we'll talk about some IoT contexts, and then we'll talk about some examples of recent breaches that were based on IoT, categories of threats, and then we'll talk about the specific challenges. And I think that's probably the most important part of the talk today, is the security challenges in IoT and what can we do to address that. So a little bit about myself. I'm a father of two, cybersecurity researcher and professor. And yes, I have worked in 6 different countries in the past 15 years. Currently serving as a professor of cybersecurity at Seneca College in Toronto, and also a research fellow at Toronto Metropolitan University. I've authored 4 books in different areas of networking and papers in different international venues. My original specialization was computer engineering. I also have several industrial certifications in security. So I think we all know what IoT is, and these small devices connected to the internet that are supposed to help us get things done. And the rapid growth in adoption of these devices is making them a very interesting target for attackers. And that's an issue that we will need to address in order to make the environments that are based on these devices reliable and trustworthy. The IoT devices, as we see them every day in our lives, are becoming more and more ubiquitous. More, we rely more on them every single day in different areas of our lives, and the rate of growth of IoT adoption has exceeded mobile phones growth by far. So how big is the IoT market? According to Statista, expenditures in billions of dollars, as you can see, have grown rapidly, almost doubled within the past 5 years. And this kind of growth of spending is not comparable to anything else, any other area of spending. And with more reliance on these devices, that makes the need for creation of reliable environments even more, even more urgent. And this kind of steady growth shows that the future is going to rely even more on IoT devices in different areas. What are the contexts of IoT? We see IoT in industrial environments. We see them in medical applications. We have seen very quick growth in wearable devices that are relevant to Internet of Medical Things. We have seen the large emergence of need for these devices during the pandemic when human-to-human contact was difficult to achieve. We needed to rely on these devices even more in applications where people needed constant monitoring, and we were not able to provide this kind of monitoring in person. In industrial IoT contexts are very vast. We have IoT devices now being part of our water treatment plants, part of our nuclear power plants, water grids, smarter grids. Everything has some sort of embedded computing in it. Smart home environments, although it sounds like one of these fancy applications that maybe not everyone needs so far, but still it's one of the important areas of development in IoT, and it's one of the areas where the cost of IoT might be less in comparison to other areas of implementation, and that's what makes it growing faster probably than few other areas of IoT implementation. Automotive IoT and connected vehicles, smart vehicles, self-driving cars, all of those applications require reliable IoT environments, require having very secure communications, secure storage of data, many privacy implications that we can talk about for hours. And one of the most recent areas where IoT is growing rapidly is agricultural IoT. Smart agriculture is growing rapidly, and we're seeing a lot of investments in smart agriculture. I can speak of Canada. I can see clearly that there is a lot of investment that's happening in smart agriculture, and a lot of areas in the agricultural space. Retail industries have always been, part of the game, and many other industries have seen rapid growth in IoT adoption, and this kind of growth drags the attention of malicious actors, and the more we grow the applications, the more we spend on these devices, the more interesting it becomes to malicious actors, and the more attention they pay to these applications. And this kind of unwanted attention from malicious actors have caused a lot of disruptions to services provided by IoT devices. We can take a look at some examples from the past few years. I'll start from the oldest one because it was one of the most disturbing attacks, Mirai botnet attack. And Mirai botnet, the DNS attack was not the first one by Mirai botnet. It was not the last one as well. I think I read in the news a couple of weeks ago, Mirai botnet was again used to conduct most recent attacks. So let's talk a little bit about Mirai botnet and why it's kind of a special case. Mirai botnet is a special type of malware that was designed to infect IoT devices, and it wasn't designed to disrupt the services of IoT devices, but rather use these IoT devices to attack something else. And building a botnet is basically building your electronic army that would help the attacker target anything. And Mirai botnet was even offered for hire in 2014 to 2016. You could go to the dark web and pay some money and say, I want you to attack this target, and Mirai botnet will do that for you. The main reason why Mirai botnet succeeded. And statistics show us that some of the recent attacks, Mirai botnet, there were points of time where it was in control of over 150,000 IoT devices. We'll discuss later on how is that possible? How is it possible that one botnet could be in control of 150,000 IoT devices at the same time and utilize them to conduct denial of service attacks like the major one that happened on DIN. It was also used for different, different attacks, such as attacks on Cloudflare, one of the largest cloud service providers in the world. And the creator of Mirai botnet got bored sometime in late 2016 and decided to share the source code of Mirai botnet publicly for free on the dark web. And that kind of sparked a very large wave of variants of Mirai botnet. And these variants are still spreading until this day. Moving on to 2019, Kaspersky says that there were over 100 million attacks on IoT devices in the first half of 2019. These attacks were not coming from a single source or using a single particular way of attack, but just a statistic that I thought would be important for us to understand the growth in these kinds of attacks. 2019 as well, Silex malware was capable of infecting 1,650 IoT devices. And I know in comparison to like 150,000 devices in Mirai botnet, that doesn't sound like a significant thing, but think of the types of these devices. It's not necessarily a smart home IoT device. What if these devices are smart medical devices? In 2021, Botinago, it infected millions of routers and IoT devices. In 2021 as well, one of the largest IoT breaches, Verkada breach, which is a manufacturer of surveillance cameras, and over 150,000 surveillance cameras were breached because of that attack. And we can talk for hours about different attacks that took place on IoT devices or using IoT devices to attack someone else. And these just samples of what is actually happening around us to these IoT devices. And that gives us the push to kind of pause and think, what exactly is going on? Why are we not manufacturing IoT devices to be secure enough? We have been doing this relatively in computers. Why don't we do that for IoT devices as well? So the categories of threats, as we have seen in the previous list, are two categories. One of them is an attack or a breach that would give access to the IoT device. In certain scenarios, this could cause a breach of privacy. It could cause access to private information. It could cause a leaking of information. And the second category is utilizing these IoT devices in malicious attacks, which basically means that the attacker is not necessarily interested in what your IoT device is capable of doing or what information it stores, but the attacker is interested in utilizing this device in attacking other users. One of the areas of research that we've worked on previously, we looked at an algorithm that could actually utilize IoT devices to break high-end ciphers, so that you would create in cryptography, it's called the Chinese lottery, a system where you would distribute the search space of all the possible encryption keys, and you let a wide distributed system of devices look for the right key for you. And we did some calculations, and we found that it's very much possible to break very complex ciphers if you have adequate number of IoT devices. And theoretically, we said in that research that it doesn't even have to be through hacking, but it could, people could rent out their unused IoT processing power, something like Airbnb of IoT devices, so that attackers might actually use these devices whenever they are not being utilized by their owners. But that's a longer discussion, maybe for a different time. So moving on to the security challenges, let's focus on why is this happening and what we can do to prevent that from happening again. One of the major areas where we have witnessed weaknesses in our research is vendors' lack of interest in security. We have seen many scenarios where vendors of IoT devices, they look up, GitHub to find certain firmware that was published, 10, 15 years ago. It's no longer maintained, and they just manufacture the cheapest possible device, and they flash this firmware, they sell it. And you go on Amazon, you want to buy a smart camera, you find one camera that would cost you $75, another camera that would cost you $15. We know that most consumers are going for the $15 one, even though it's using a firmware that's been outdated, that has very well-known vulnerabilities that are unpatched for a very long time. There is what we found is there is a notable lack of patching for known vulnerabilities. Many vulnerabilities are being reported to vendors, and vendors are not taking any action because they don't really consider security their issue. So we have seen many outdated firmware instances going around the world. There is lack of proper security testing before device release. In many vendors' manufacturing process, the focus was always on optimizing resources, optimizing the manufacturing process, and in many cases we found there is zero care about security. No one is testing the devices, no one doing even simple internal pen testing, vulnerability analysis. One of the issues that we have also noticed is something called placebo patches, which is a problem that we're witnessing not only in IoT devices, but in the security industry in general. So what are placebo patches? Placebo patches are basically patches that are issued by the vendor, thinking that they are fixing the security issue, but the patch is not actually fixing the security issue. And we can talk about many examples, and this is not something that is happening with smaller vendors. It happens even with larger organizations. We have seen cases of this happening with vendors like Microsoft and Amazon. They get notified about a vulnerability, or they detect a vulnerability. They hastily put together a patch. They issue the patch thinking that this would fix the problem, but this placebo patch would either fix the problem and cause another problem, or it wouldn't fix the problem at all, because they're trying to do it very quickly to address a pressing vulnerability, and they end up doing it the wrong way. And we have seen examples like Log4j vulnerability last year. It was a very widely exploited vulnerability. It took about 1 week for the development team to issue a patch, and the patch did not fix the problem. It caused another issue, and then it took them about 4 or 5 more days to issue another patch. And during this, it sounds like a short period of time. Within these 9 days, there were millions of servers hacked because of this. Placebo patches are a very serious issue, and they are less monitored in IoT. There are a lot of actions that are being taken by some organizations that are focused on security, but mostly they are focused on server software, client software, but in very limited cases, they are focused on IoT devices. So yeah, this is the first category of challenges that we find in securing IoT devices, the vendor's lack of interest. The second one is low security awareness on the consumer side. Consumers, in certain cases that we have seen, sometimes consumers do not understand the dimensions of what an IoT device is actually capable of doing. Although we call these devices smart, many consumers do not understand, how smart these devices are. It's like they don't see that this is actually, a very small computer that runs an operating system and can be hacked just like a computer. Many consumers prefer low-cost devices even if they were not secure, and that's basically lack of awareness. The example that we mentioned earlier about purchasing the $15 camera in comparison to the $75 one is a clear example of lack of awareness and preferring low-cost devices over secure devices. And security is always an afterthought. I don't want to say always, but in many cases that we have seen, security is an afterthought. It's not something that is considered, a deciding factor when a consumer is purchasing a device. We have seen that in many cases, if we ask, and we did that, we asked consumers to kind of prioritize how do you make the decision of purchasing a specific type of IoT device. And security was always, number 4 or 5 on the list. And this is something that we need to work on, because whenever we talk about security awareness, people think of, very popular terms like don't click a phishing link, don't download an attachment from someone you do not know. And these are extremely important things. Phishing is very serious. It's email is the attack vector in 80% of successful attacks. So it's absolutely important, but we need to consider other sides of security awareness, which is security awareness at the stage of buying devices. When you're purchasing something, you need to consider security a priority. And I know that there are, financial challenges behind this, and people would think, do I really have to pay double the price or triple the price to get a more secure device? And it's more secure. It's not absolutely secure. So, yeah, this is definitely one of the areas of challenges. Difficulties in applying patches. That's one of the things that we have noticed. I don't want to sound old, but there were many times before when we could not update our phones, for example, our smartphones, through OTA updates. Updating phones previously, and that was like 15 years ago. I remember my first Android phone. There were no OTA updates. But there is no place on the phone where you can click update and it would download and install the update. If you needed to update the device, you would need to connect it to a computer and run a specialized software. You need to download the firmware from the website. You need to make sure that you downloaded the absolutely correct firmware, because there is no going back. If you use the wrong firmware, you have bricked the device. And I have done that tons of times before. But the idea is that not all consumers are tech savvy in that way. Think of smaller IoT devices that would require, in some cases, we've seen devices that would require to be connected to a computer to be updated with specialized software. And, the vendors would like to take this off their shoulders. They give you like 10 warnings before you start flashing the firmware. And consumers who are not tech savvy, it's scary, to see all of these pop-up warnings that say, you should not be disconnecting the device. You need to make sure that, the process goes on. And sometimes the update process itself is flawed. So I have seen cases where you're updating a device and it just gets stuck and you don't know what to do. If you disconnect it, the device is dead. If you keep it connected, nothing's happening. Sometimes, and that's also in some scenarios relevant to the vendors, they don't make the easiest devices to patch, and that sometimes we have seen issues where people don't apply patches because the patching process itself is very complex. And it could be a little bit scary when you have, you're not using over-the-air updates. Non-OTA updates require tech-savvy users to be able to perform the update without issues. Many consumers do not apply updates because they fear breaking the device. It's not only breaking the devices, actually, it's breaking systems. And we have seen this in even larger corporations. Sometimes they have, and we have seen this in, I don't want to mention specific examples. We have seen this in many large organizations. They have systems that are not necessarily compatible with each other out of the box. So they create very fragile kind of compatibility between them, very weakly built bridges that would, help transfer data from certain formats to certain other formats. Data that's produced by a certain IoT device is not fully readable by the computer, so it needs to undergo certain types of bridging or processing. And whenever an update comes through or a patch, we have seen that many users fear that patch. They're afraid that it might break something within the system. It might fix a problem but cause another problem that would break this kind of fragile setup where everything's connected. And that leads to a very dangerous situation where the consumer is actually aware of a very dangerous vulnerability and they consciously decide not to patch the system. And this is a very dangerous situation because you basically know that the lock on your door is not good enough, and you keep it there because you say, what, it looks good, I don't want to mess up how my door looks. And this is, it's connected to vendors, it's connected to user awareness, but sometimes the complexities of the patching process can cause this kind of hesitance. We have seen that in personal computers, we have kind of surpassed that. We have seen, smartphones also have surpassed that, but specifically in personal computers, we have got to a point where there are patches that are applied forcibly. Dangerous security patches are applied forcibly in certain versions of Windows, for example, so that, if it's a dangerous security thing, it has to be updated no matter what. Because we know, all of us have been there when you get the pop-up that there is an update, remind me later, remind me later, remind me later, and you keep pushing that for a later time, but that needs to be done at some point. There are also poor IoT design choices. We have seen in many IoT devices, firmware is poorly designed. It relies most of the time on outdated open source projects that are not being maintained properly. One of the issues we have seen in our research is some firmware includes hard-coded credentials, and this is like one of the biggest mistakes that you can make in terms of security. The firmware should never include hard-coded credentials. Usernames and passwords, passkeys, tokens, they should never be hard-coded in the software. They should always, there should always be a space where this is stored securely, but it's not part of the firmware itself. Many vendors choose outdated open source firmware because it's free, even though in most scenarios that we've seen. It's not being maintained. I'm not saying that open source is bad, not at all. We have seen excellent, in terms of security, excellently designed open source. I'm just talking about choosing outdated open source projects that are not being maintained. Someone worked on this 10 years ago and they moved on to another project and it's over. So it's not being properly maintained. If there is a vulnerability that's detected, no one is actually patching the vulnerability. So it can be really dangerous to use these unmaintained open source projects. Default credentials. I mentioned that we'll go back to Mirai botnet again, and default credential is one of the main reasons why Mirai botnet was successful in spreading in hundreds of thousands of devices. Many users do not care enough to change the default credentials. And many of us are probably guilty of this. Think about when was the last time you changed your router's password at home. Some of these router passwords are still on their default settings. Other users don't know how to change default credentials. Sometimes it's a complex process. And remember, we're talking about IoT devices, so it's not easily accessible. In other cases, which is even worse, the credentials are hard-coded and cannot be changed. They're built into the system. They cannot be changed. You cannot change the administrator password in some IoT devices, as we have seen. So going back to Mirai botnet, one more time, Mirai botnet was designed as a malware that would do the following. Whenever a device is infected, the first thing it does, it would scan the network looking for other IoT devices. When it finds other IoT devices, it would perform intensive scans on these IoT devices to try to figure out what type of IoT device they are. Is it a smart cam? Is it a router? Is it, whatever other device? And then it would, once it doesn't only find the type, but also finds like the specific vendor or version of that device. And when it finds out that this is, for example, a D-Link, whatever device, it has its own database of stored default usernames and passwords, and it would try to brute force into that device using the default usernames and passwords. And believe it or not, it succeeded because of that, because the malware holds a database of default usernames and passwords, and it would figure out what type of device you have and then try to use these credentials to log into your device and then spread the malware and then move on to the next device and so on. And that helped in spreading over 150,000 devices. That's very problematic, because when you think of this, it is absolutely avoidable. It's not something that, it's a vulnerability that we didn't know about. No, it's just default credentials. It's just default username and password that were not changed. And that caused, the creation of one of the largest botnets in history. And, you can imagine with the power of 150,000 devices under your arms, what you can do with them, what kind of damage you can cause. In 2016, the DIN attack that we talked about, it was the largest attack, the largest DDoS attack that was performed up until that time. Of course, there were others that were larger attacks at a later time. But default credentials are a very serious problem. So what can we do to address these security issues? We have come up with a couple of lists. One of them is directed towards vendors, and the other one's directed towards consumers. So on the vendor side, we need to follow secure software design practices, such as DevSecOps, which embeds security in the development process from the beginning. One of the major issues that we face is that when people are developing software, whether for IoT or other types of systems, one of the issues is that it's just it's an afterthought. Security is something that, we design the system, we run it by the user, and then we think about how we can secure the system. And that's a very dangerous approach. That's why, practices such as DevSecOps can be really important in addressing this. The second recommendation is employ rigorous pen testing prior to product release. And pen testing can be very helpful, even if you don't have your own pen testing team, which I think every IoT manufacturer should have. I think it's not a bad idea to hire a third party to do regular pen testing to your devices to make sure that they are, vulnerability free. A third point is issue timely patches to vulnerabilities. Definitely, addressing vulnerabilities as early as possible is very important. Sometimes we had to utilize third-party services that kind of practice more pressure on vendors to release patches as early as possible. The last point is utilizing OTA updates. Just get rid of the older systems that do not provide OTA updates. The next firmware that you'll manufacture must include a mechanism for OTA updates so that you can just receive the update automatically without the need of specialized software. We understand that there are certain limitations. OTA updates require space, require certain processing capability to be able to apply the updates without breaking the system. But still, it's a very important feature to have in any IoT device that enables the user to kind of tick the box of automatic updates, and then the device would handle that on its own. On the consumer side, a few of the things that we've mentioned before: purchase devices from well-known vendors. I know that seems a little bit challenging because we know that well-known vendors usually capitalize on their reputation, and they charge a lot more than low-end devices. Second point, ensure devices are patched regularly. Make sure that you always update your systems. Third point, change default credentials. A very obvious point, but it's really unfortunate that this is 2023. We still have to tell people to change default passwords. Number 4, employ compensating controls when patches are late. And this is a technique that we've been using in our networks, on our systems, on PCs, on servers. We use that all the time. Whenever we find a vulnerability, the vulnerability is not patched yet, we create compensating controls. We get to the point where sometimes we disable certain services, we block a few ports on our firewalls, we add a couple of rules to the intrusion detection system as a way of reducing the probability of success of exploiting these vulnerabilities. So the vulnerability is there, you might, you haven't got the patch yet, or the patch will break something in your systems. That's fine. Don't just leave it and accept the risk. You need to mitigate the risk using compensating controls so that you do something that would reduce the risk of this vulnerability. So the final takeaway, when a malicious actor hacks into your smart device at home, it can be a very unpleasant experience, and it might be even a violation of privacy. But let's think about a broader view. What happens if they hack an IoT, industrial IoT device controlling a nuclear power plant, or an IoT device that's controlling a water treatment facility? Think about that, because most people tend to think about IoT security in terms of, my smart camera at home got hacked, someone got a stream of my backyard, and that's annoying. I'm not saying that this is not a violation of privacy, I'm just saying that the amount of risk associated with certain contexts is thousands of times higher than risk associated with smart home environments. Think of nuclear power plants, water treatment facilities. Think of medical IoT. I think you might have probably heard of the ransomware attack that happened to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. It's a terrible thing to do. Why would you attack a kid's hospital? And it's Sick Kids Hospital handles like 80% of their cases are pediatric cancers, but attackers did it anyway. So think of these scenarios when, in medical context, when an IoT device gets hacked, what can be the repercussions in industrial IoT, a factory, a power plant, a water treatment plant. These are very real scenarios. We have seen this happen. We have seen attacks on national grids. We have seen attacks on Colonial Pipeline. We have seen attacks on so many scenarios that can very easily lead to catastrophic repercussions. So let's keep that in mind when we think of secure and reliable environments. And that's all. Thank you very much for your listening, and I'm open to receive any questions. Thank you. So any questions from the audience?
Yes, hello. I have a question because in the beginning you said you're also using the machine learning in your area of fields, your fields. So that wasn't tipped, or it wasn't handled during the presentation. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? How you're using that in your fields, in the certain fields of Internet of Things?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. So, machine learning is actually one of the areas that have been, the applications of machine learning. We're seeing all the talk about LLMs, but there is a lot more to machine learning than LLMs. And the applications of machine learning in IoT security specifically are very, very wide. We have conducted a lot of research in, of course, one of the oldest areas where machine learning was applied in security is intrusion detection. And this is actually the topic of the paper that I'll be discussing later today. It's most of the time people do not understand the context of IoT, and it's how special it is in comparison to other areas of security. Most of the time, intrusion detection systems that are designed for normal networks are not really 100% fit for IoT environments. And the areas in general, I don't want to go into a lot of details, but generally speaking, there are many areas where machine learning can be actually very effective in helping, which is intrusion detection in IoT environments, solutions that are specifically designed for IoT environments, and machine learning for malware detection, specifically for IoT-based malware, machine learning for any kind of anomaly detection. Even I have seen very interesting research in firmware analysis, utilizing machine learning and analyzing firmware of IoT to find vulnerabilities. These are very promising areas, and I think that these are areas that we need to give more focus to in the coming few years to address these issues. Within the IoT context, one of the issues that we've seen in machine learning is that, is it really feasible to run a device-based machine learning solution this is one of the issues that we try to address, is to create kind of lightweight machine learning systems that can actually run host-based instead of being network-based, but still network-based ones are still very effective. But it's a very interesting area of research. I would definitely recommend everyone to look into it. But thank you, very interesting question.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Good morning, Professor. I wanted to first make a comment and then ask you your opinion about this. Normally, when you look at sensors, you will see that one of the major problems we've got is the limited processing power that we've got on those sensors. And one of the factors that actually limit the processing power is the memory that we've got there. So if you want to implement security, if you want to increase the level of security of these sensors, obviously, we will need more robust software to do that, if you're talking about host-based systems. So I think like it's like a chicken and egg problem. Like you try to increase the memory, but still the price increases, and you have other systems that are more, let's say, more sophisticated that come and you have more sophisticated attacks, and the problem continues. So is there a potential solution to that? Like apart from, because I don't see like increasing just memory is going to kind of have a significant impact in limiting security attacks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is, I call this the $1 million question. This is a very important question. We want to create devices that are very much optimized and they would cost least possible. At the same time, we want to create devices that are secure. And the triangle of security, usability, and cost is kind of, there is a lot of pull between them. And the idea is that in general, semiconductors are becoming cheaper. And we have seen, especially after the pandemic is going away, and it's funny saying that while I have COVID. So with the pandemic going away, and we have seen a drop in the prices of semiconductors. I think that host-based solutions are very important because the type of data that contribute to security decisions that are host-based are much stronger than the data that's collected at the network level. Because at the network level, we look at the traffic only, and the host-based level, we have a lot more information to look at, a lot more logs, a lot more information. There are temporary solutions where you can, for example, build very small agents that would redirect these logs to a centralized system that would help you in the detection process. We have tried that. It's workable. It's not ideal because it would cause a lot of traffic. But I think the solution lies in the future where we would have, we currently have cheaper memory. It's cheaper to create more advanced processors. So I think the solution to move forward is to have devices that have stronger processing power. I know that you've probably heard this before, that the phone that you have in your pocket now has more processing power than the processor that took people to the moon in 1963, and that's a fact. Now we have processors in our smartwatches that are more powerful than a personal computer in the 1980s. So I think that we're moving in the right direction, that we're having devices that are more capable and having more memory. As you said, one of the highest requirements is memory and processing power. Having more, memory and processing power where you would have, you can do your job as a sensor completely, and then have a little bit more to do the security side of it, is the possible answer. I think relying on network-based solutions is good for the time being. It's okay, not ideal, but we need to consider this. And this is something for the vendors to consider, is that it's not only about giving the minimum possible processing power that is barely enough to do the sensing job, but also to give more processing power to protect from security threats. But that's an excellent question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to ask a second question. So my second question is, as a cybersecurity specialist, what do you think about the level of sophistication of the attacks, especially when we consider, like, things like AI have gained a lot of traction in the world. We talk about ChatGPT and all that. So how do you see the level of sophistication of attack in the coming years? What kind of AI-based, machine learning-based attacks you can foresee, in the future?
Well, that's another good question. Thank you. So, first of all, let's just put the ChatGPT and LLMs at rest when it comes to security. These models are built to create content that sounds right. It's not built to create content that is definitely correct, which basically means that it's not, there is no magical way for ChatGPT to create something that it hasn't heard before. It will create content. It's a kind of a predictive model where it would predict the next word based on reading the previous words and creating prediction based on the data set used in training. I'm not downplaying the importance of it. I'm just saying that it will definitely be used, models like this will be used and trained based on security data, and that can produce more useful context within security. But it will, I don't see these particular tools causing larger amount of risk than what we have already. We already live in a time where the amount of risk is extremely high. We have seen cyber gangs moving from being actual gangs with guns into electronic format because it's easier and cheaper for them to run a ransomware business than run an actual gang business on the ground. It's easier, it's cheaper, it doesn't take a lot of people, it makes a lot of money. And this is the trend. Currently, you can go on the dark web and rent a ransomware attack to target a certain target or victim. That's one side of it, is that we're facing times where cybercrime is actually more lucrative business than actual crime. Another side of it is that AI is developing rapidly because of the developments in processing power. We all know that AI is not new. AI has been there for a long time. Neural networks have been there for a really long time. But because now we have the processing power that enables us to put this, creating, I think the highest, the largest size LLM, like 40 billion instances used in training. It's not something that was impossible before. It was possible, but it would cost us millions of times more what it would cost us now to run this kind of system. But because of these developments, now we have AI capacity that can be utilized by malicious actors, definitely, but not, it's not like someone would create a malicious ChatGPT and they would go to that ChatGPT and they would say, create a ransomware, ransomware malware for me that can attack Windows, Windows 10 version 22 H2. That's not how these systems work. The real use of AI in cyber attacks is going to be completely different. It's going to be based on how attackers will try to use AI to manipulate AI-based detection systems. And this is an area that we're working on. Also, there is a very soon to be paper to be published about this areas on how AI can actually be utilized to attack AI-based or evade AI-based detection systems. And That's the area where I'm really concerned, because AI systems, machine learning based systems basically are as strong as the source data. And if your source data is not good enough, these systems can be manipulated. And we're trying to use AI in doing very complex tasks, building systems that would detect obfuscated malware, for example. One of the most complex tasks ever is to detect malware that was, meaningfully masked to look as something good by the attacker. And there are many evasion techniques that are being used by attackers. I think that attackers have not got to the point where they are fully utilizing machine learning and AI yet, maybe because of lack of understanding. But the main takeaway is that ChatGPT and similar systems are not, I don't see them creating higher risk in terms of cybersecurity. I think that the risk is already there. I think that there are hundreds of other sources where an attacker can get trained and they can get easy access to how to create malware, how to create Trojan horses. This data is already out there. It's available, and I don't think ChatGPT is actually adding more to that risk surface.
Right, I think we'll have to stop it here. We reached the point for the coffee break, so it's half an hour, right?
Yes.
And we come back in half an hour for the poster presentations for papers. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Mohammed.